Walk. I'm excited to be here again for another episode. At this time I have my friend Rebecca Schwartzkopf. We are fellow church members. Also, we serve at the board at the Christian Aid Center. And so I'll let you introduce yourself. Tell me about you.
My name is Rebecca Schwartzkopf. I am a 58-year-old mother of 3 and a now grandmother of 1.
Wow, that's so exciting.
Yes.
And the one, how old is the one?
He is 5 months.
Okay, that's new. And then your son also this past weekend just graduated.
Yes, he did. He got his PhD from the University of Montana.
And he's going to stay in that area?
No, I don't know. He has a lot of irons in the fire.
Okay.
His passion is to do apologetics at Oxford.
Right.
And so you have to have a PhD in order to go, which he didn't know until, after he had been, asked to participate in this PhD program.
Right.
So the Lord just has been paving the way.
Yeah, he set him up nicely. Wow. Without knowing.
Right.
That's
right.
interesting.
No idea.
I have a job that requires a master's at least degree or a doctorate, and I tell people that I just kind of really fell into it. I know your son did a lot of planning, but it's interesting that this next step required a PhD, which he wasn't even aware of.
Right.
And I think, well, look at that, you're already set up for that.
Right. When we were in Africa not too long ago, I was talking to a man who was a nurse practitioner, and he was telling me that this was not his plan to do this, that he was actually doing something else, and COVID hit, and he had to do something different. And so he ended up being a nurse practitioner in a different line, a different specialty.
Right.
And he said that it was his passion.
Wow.
That, the Lord just led him, even though he went kicking and screaming, to what was actually his passion.
Right. That's how I feel. I feel I didn't have any of the confidence to think sciences and studying medicine would be something I would do. I do, having done that for now almost 15 years, I feel like, wow, actually God did design me for this. Like this hits a lot of the things that he gave me, the strengths. So tell me more about you.
I have been a stay-at-home mom. I was a nurse and an X-ray tech. And yes, I no sooner got my RN than I got pregnant, and that was the end of it.
Okay.
So about this point in time, I probably know enough to kill you. And so then not too long ago, the Lord has always spoken to me in different ways.
Yes.
And I never put emphasis to it. I never gave it, what it deserved in my life. I never really even thought of it as God speaking to me.
Sure.
And until we moved to Washington and we started attending Life Church, and I was in their impact class, and I just started seeing, this was the Lord, and I didn't give it, the weight that it that it deserved. And so while I was in impact class, some friends and I went to Bethel for a prophetic conference. And honestly, I wasn't there for the prophetic conference. It was a road trip.
Right.
and I didn't know what the Lord, I never thought of myself as very prophetic.
Right.
And so I was there. And while I was in one of the workshops, a woman said to me, she just turned around and looked at me and said, "Write a book. And you're supposed to write a book. It doesn't have to be a long book, but there is something that the Lord wants you to write about." And I looked around to see who she might be talking to, and it was me. And it was funny because I had, in my probably my early 30s, had thought about writing a book, but then I thought, what do I have to say? And just kind of shelved that idea. And so I went home, and it kind of weighed on me, started praying about it a little bit. And at one point in time, I said, I can't do that. That just must be, she must have had pizza or something. Right. And the Lord just so clearly spoke to me and said, "I'll help you." And I know that voice. And so I was in.
You'd been hearing that voice more clearly just before that.
Yes, and it's just a different voice. That's not my voice in my head. It's just, something different.
Right.
And and I had heard it, not a lot, maybe, maybe once or twice, but I knew it. And so I sat down, and at first I thought it would be a devotional, because I thought, well, that's not a long book, but then really it's 365 pages. And so, but as I started writing, things came to me, scenarios in my life and how they played out, and my writing just started veering towards hearing God speak.
Right.
And so I wrote the book, He Speaks.
Which I think I've had a chance to read half of it. I'm not done with it completely yet, and I always find that fascinating. One, I'm someone who hates writing, so writing a book would be so foreign. But here you are. You even said, actually, I had in my 30s. I maybe thought I heard or felt should write a book. You kind of table that. Life happens in between, and then the theme comes back again, and now you're being prophesied over. But it seems like the biggest barrier that most people encounter is that the obedience part. So he's speaking all the time.
Right.
And then I think as we search him, and you talked about doing impact, and then you become more aware. It's like he's talking all the time. He's listening, and so you start recognizing his voice. You say, "This voice is foreign. This is not my voice." And then I know who's speaking. The sheep know the shepherd's voice. But so you come home. And you just start writing? Is that?
Pretty much, right? Just got some paper, started, just putting all my thoughts down on the paper, and then I would be writing, and I might put something in there, and I'd look at it and be like, oh, I don't know if that fits. Maybe I need to rework it, and I'd rework it, and I'd rework it, and I'd be like, okay. And then I just get it out. I don't want it in there. That's why it doesn't ever seem to fit. Right. And so, and I'd be like, oh, all that time. And so I would, take it out and go on. So it was, it's daunting if you look at the project as a whole. But I just started looking at it as, whatever he brought to me, the memories he brought to me, I would just write them down and, just started fitting them into, the book is in two parts. The first part is hearing when I didn't know to listen, and then the second part is listening when I knew to hear. Right. And so I separated them out, and it just kind of started flowing.
So you have some really great life experiences that you talk about in the book. You want to share any about this where you felt like God kind of brought this memory up and said, this is something that I'd like you to share?
Yes. Well, you know what? It's funny. It's more like they are memories that have always been at the forefront of my mind. It's like they've never been like anything that sat dormant. It was just like he always kept them alive, and near. Right. And so, the first one that I talk about was I had such a death grip on my children. I mean, I was so fearful of something happening to them, and
the nurse mom in you,
right. And so so this one day I was standing at the kitchen sink and I was washing dishes. And a woman was talking on the radio, and I was listening to her testimony, and she had cancer, and she talked about how when she went through the cancer treatment, she was so sick that she could barely even get out of bed and crawl to the toilet, and just talked about how, she met the Lord in a different way. And I was standing at the sink, and I was like, oh, God. I just want that so much, but I'm afraid of the cost. Right. Will it cost me my children? Right. And I didn't think anything much about it after that. I dried my hands and started looking around, and I noticed that our youngest daughter, Amelia, had gone horseback riding with her dad. And so we had an arena out front that sat kind of below the house, and I was looking out, and they weren't in the arena. And I thought, well, that's weird. And so I asked our daughter, Catherine, have you seen Dad and Amelia? And She said, yeah, they went, they decided to go, out in the neighborhood. So I was like, oh, okay. Well, not too much later, Amelia comes running in, and she's covered in dirt, and she's crying, and she's not making a lot of sense. And so I get her cleaned up, and I sit her down with her sister, and I go out to the pasture to talk to her dad to find out what happened.
Right.
And he said, I couldn't. He said, you're not going to believe this, but the horse was acting crazy, and I made a move to like pat his chest to say, wake up, pay attention.
Right.
And the horse reared up, and Amelia fell off the back. And it was before really people were wearing helmets as much, so she didn't have a helmet. And she is basically now laying underneath the horse, and God. His hoof picks up, and it goes over her head, just skimming the top of it, so that it picks up her hair, and then it lands on the other side of her head.
Wow!
And Eric got her out of there, and he was like, "Man, it was awful. I was right there, and there was nothing I could do." And so I just made an about face and just marched into the house, into my bedroom, shut the door, got on my knees, and I was like, Lord, thank you for sparing Amelia. Because, he could have squashed her head. And I just felt him say to me, give me your children. Eric was right there, and there was nothing he could do. But I was there.
Right.
And I protected her.
Right.
And so I pried my grip off the kids and gave them back to the Lord, which is something I've had to do over and over and over again. But He's faithful to remind me.
Good. So what does that mean when you say, I give them back to the Lord?
I just said, they're yours. I can't worry about them. I can't stand guard over them. Can't go to school with them.
Right.
I have to let you have them without strings attached, and those strings for me are worry, and so
that's like an Abraham type surrender.
Yeah.
Wow.
Maybe, but but it was traumatic,
right?
For both of us. But actually, Amelia was really traumatized. But,
yeah, I know. I bet.
Yeah.
But you clearly saw his hand protecting her.
Right. Well, and it was like I had just had that conversation with him about the kids. And he was like, see, you can trust me.
And now you have a grandchild you got to trust him with, too.
Right. Right. I know. What was funny? I am a person who could perseverate all day long on everything that can happen to the kids. And I remember when they would leave for school, I would drop to my knees, I would pray for them, get up, and I was done. And, I could go about my day and and just let them go.
Right.
And so...
That has to be a process to get there.
Yeah, it was. Well, it was him just showing me that he was trustworthy.
And you listening.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. What choice do I have? I could make myself crazy.
Well, I've tried
that. Right. Sometimes I have to just go, stop, out loud.
Right.
To get my brain to refocus and break that thought pattern.
Right. You talked about Africa.
Yes.
Tell me about Africa.
So we are involved in building a medical clinic in a small village in Africa, and in Kenya. And so we were going out to visit the site and see what was going on, so that as problems and and things arise, we would at least have a visual in our minds of where it was, what was happening, what's nearby. And this was all started by a friend of ours named Kim Baxter, who had lost his son to an accidental death, and his son had gone with him to Africa, and he's a eye doctor. And so his son had said to him, Dad, these people need us. We got to keep coming, you know. And so when he passed away,
that was his call.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so Kim had told people his story, and, you know, next thing you know, he had people from Johns Hopkins and all these, you know, places saying, you know, hey, we want to help you. Let's, you know, build a clinic.
Right.
So we got involved in that. And so we went out to Africa, and it was Eric and I and our son Caleb and his fiance Aubrey. And so while we were there, somebody heard, well, a woman named Alice, Pastor Alice, had heard that Eric was an internist, not an eye doctor. And so basically, she hijacked us, and she set up 3 clinics. She has 3 orphanages, and she has about 900 orphans that she feeds and schools and takes care of. And so she put on these clinics, about 300 kids at each orphanage, and we would vaccinate them, and Eric would, you know, see those who were sick, and then the people of the villages actually came. The older people would come, and he would see them and help to, you know, diagnose and, you know, give, you know, a short summary and what they could possibly do, what was available. And so, but I noticed that while we were there, I started getting angry, and I was getting madder and madder and madder. And we got home, and it didn't go away. And I was mad at Eric. And but I just couldn't figure it out. But I just had this knot in my stomach and this burning fire that I just wanted to rip his head off. And so we went to a concert, and on the way home, I said, I am so mad at you. And he goes, I know. And I'm like, but I don't know why. You know, and he's like, me either. You know, so I just started praying, and I was like, Lord, what is this? And he spoke so clearly, and he said, you have an orphan spirit. And I was like, what the heck is that? I'd never heard of that. You know, but leave it to the Lord to get you in the middle of 900 orphans to teach you something about yourself. Right. And so what it is that, you know, I've always done within the church. You know, anything that was asked of me, I will do it. I will do it. You know, even to the point where you're overworked, overwhelmed, and mad. Right. And so what happens is that you are operating out of yourself, and not out of the love of God. So it's like I'll do this, and you'll accept me, right? Rather than I am loved. And so out of that love, you know, I'm going to serve you, right. You know, and you can put limits, you know, but without that piece of love, you know, with the Lord, you just operate out of yourself looking for kudos. Right. You're never filled. You're always looking for a compliment, to be seen. And so, I started reading more and more about this, and I was like, oh my gosh, that is so me. You know, I was raised without a father. And I have never known the love of a father. And so it's very difficult for me to accept or feel God's love. And so I'm always trying to be accepted. And so it's like, pick me, you know, pick me.
You earn it.
Yeah. Right. I mean, when I was a kid in grade school, I used to bring gum and candy and stuff to give to kids so that they'd be my friend. Right. Yes. You know, always trying to you know, manipulate friendships. And so he showed me that, and so now I've been working through that. I'm not completely there, but it certainly was a giant piece of the puzzle. Right.
You sure do a lot of listening and introspection. That's amazing, and I just love listening to you, and you share so openly and very like matter of fact, like, okay, this is what happened. I heard this, and then this is, and you took those steps. Has that always been in your character? Is this who you are, or is that something that a skill that you ended up developing?
I think both. You know, when I didn't know to listen, I was hearing him. Right. But I wasn't mature enough to give it its proper weight.
Well, I think that's the problem that
Yeah.
most of us are, is, right, the maturity.
And realizing
Because
it's him.
Right. And it's so easy to get defensive.
Pardon me?
It's so easy to become defensive.
Yes.
And then we put the walls up.
Right.
Versus looking for an opportunity to hear him, that he's trying to help me out. And this, you talked about Father, and you talked about this orphan spirit. And so it's hard to have, if you haven't experienced that love, that unconditional love of a Father that says it's not based upon what you're doing, what you're giving me. My love is there for you regardless.
Right.
But then it helps with correction whenever we hear it. I guess I'm speaking now personally how it's a struggle sometimes,
Yeah.
and I know he's right,
Right.
and I know God's right, and I'll have moments where I'm like, okay, God, I hear it, I don't like it, but you're right, and I know you're right, and so help me to work on that.
Right.
But that takes a willingness to be able to look into ourselves and say, okay,
Right.
I want to change a pattern. And often having to look outside of myself because that's the only one I know. And so there's all these blind spots that I'm not aware of.
Right. Right. But if we pray, he is faithful, to show us what they are. And I knew that I was struggling. I just didn't know what it was. And I knew that, that is something that has been a struggle throughout my life, was this, constantly doing to be accepted. But I didn't know why. And so I couldn't fix it. Not that I fix anything,
Right.
but I just walking blind.
Right.
And so when he finally showed me that, it was, appalling and a relief. And so, so it's been this journey of, because in that you feel so much condemnation.
Right.
And so the Lord has set me on this kind of crazy journey. And so that was a year ago, January. And so now I'm, as time has gone on, I've read some books about the orphan spirit. And then I came across a book by Watchman Nee called The Common Christian Life. And it's basically a walk through Romans.
Okay.
And so what Watchman Nee says in one of his chapters, I think it's chapter 3, he says, if you feel condemnation, then you still think that you have something to do with your salvation.
Right.
That just oh my goodness, you're right. And I can remember that for years I struggled with, am I saved? Am I not saved? Right. Because the sinner's prayer is not really biblical. And so a lot of times you can have people who, want to get you off their back, and so they pray the prayer, but then they have this false sense of security. Or you say the prayer, but then you're like, did I mean it? Was I sincere? And you start questioning, what you were doing when it actually has nothing to do with you, but everything to do with the Lord, And so that was huge for me. And then another, I believe it's chapter 7 or chapter 9, he talks about Romans 7, where Paul says, what I want to do, I don't do, and what I don't do, that's the thing that I do. Help me, And one of the things that Watchman Nee says is that the problem with that chapter is the word I. Because we can't do it.
Right.
And he gives this scenario. He tells this story of when he was a young man and he was in China, and it was probably like around the 30s or 40s, and there were a group of men staying in a home, and but because of the volume of people that were there, he and all the men every day would go to the river and bathe. So he's standing at the river, and none of them are really good swimmers, but there was one man who was a good swimmer. And so one of the guys is out into the river, and he gets too far out, and he's drowning. So he is yelling and for help, help, help. And Watchman Nee is, standing on the banks, kind of up a little bit, and he's looking around and who can help him? Who can help him? And he sees the man who's a good swimmer. and he's standing on the bank, and he's just watching him. And watch him, and he starts yelling at him, get in there, get him. The guy is, he is getting tired, and he's getting more tired.
Right.
And he's going down, he's coming up a little bit slower.
Right.
And so, and finally, when it's like he's not going to come back up again, the man jumps in the water and swims out and gets him.
Right.
And brings him back. And then, so Watchman Nee goes running down there, and he says, "You are the most selfish Christian I have ever met in my entire life." Right. And the man said to him, "If I would have jumped in any sooner, he would have drowned us both. But I had to wait until he was exhausted so that I could help him." Right. And Watchman Nee said, that is exactly what God does for us, is that he's not going to fight us. Right. He waits until we're played out and ready and willing, and then he saves us. I mean, not like salvation, but he he helps us. And so that was huge for me too, because I'm a major manipulator. I will manipulate my circumstances every way I can. Right. And so that was so helpful. So now I'm on my way. I know what, my orphan spirit, I know what I've been struggling with. And then, he set me free in 2 areas. And then we went for our 30th wedding anniversary to Israel. And while we were in
That was just recently.
Yeah.
Congratulations on the 30th.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, we both got COVID. Of course.
Right.
So there was a man there who was talking about a book that he had read and how it had really impacted his life. So I was eavesdropping, and I asked him as we were getting off the bus, what the book was. And so he told me that it was called Living Fearless. And it helped him to figure out who his identity was. Who did God make him to be? And and that was like pivotal in his relationship. Well, that's something that I've always struggled with, is who am I? Right. So so I get the book, and the man wants you to read the book in 10 hours. He wants you to do the whole thing at once. So I prepared. I set it, I set time aside. I fasted. I prayed, and then on a Saturday, I pulled that book out and I started reading it. And there's a point in time where he is praying for you, and you're praying for you, and then you're to listen to who the Lord says you are. So I do all this, and in my mind I have like popcorn going off, and it's like, I'm an encourager, I'm this, all these things. And then all of a sudden I just hear this, and I just heard the Lord say, liberator. And I was like, wow, liberator. That is not, that's nothing I would think of. That is not a word that was even, near what I was thinking. And a little bit later, I'm praying again and asking him, is there something else? And he said, and again, the popcorn is like, but he's going to say encourager, and he says champion. And I thought, champion? And not like, I am the champion, but more of I'm a champion of people,
of causes,
a voice,
sure. Yeah.
For people who don't have one.
Right.
And so I was like, wow, that's interesting. So I write that down. And then I'm reading, and as I'm reading some more in the book, the Lord brings back to me a memory of a time when I was 8 years old, and I was on a swim team, and it was kind of like state for summer swimming, so it was like the final competition. And my coach had put me in all these races, and 2 of them were IMs, where you do each stroke, at least 50, sometimes 100 yards. And I knew that when I do that race, I am exhausted, and my brother had to pull me out of the pool because I'm just exhausted. I was 8 years old. And so he had me in, I believe, the 50 and the 100, IM, and then he had me in, butterfly and freestyle. And I panicked. And so instead of going to the meet, I went sailing with some friends and had a miserable time. And and that had never left me. But what happened in my choosing to do the lesser of the two, was that it started a precedent in my life where, I would weigh what I was doing, and if it just seemed too hard, I would do the lesser thing. Mm-hmm. And he said so clearly, I didn't create you to be a quitter. I created you to be an overcomer. Mm-hmm. And so overcomer was my third word. Mm-hmm. And so now I have these words, in my spirit, And so there's a thing that God created us with called the reticulation activation system, reticulating activation system. And what that is that internally we have this thing that it keeps you from hearing your heartbeat, all the time. And it has and it also, say you're going to go buy a white Toyota, and so you are driving down the highway, and now what do you see? 100 white Toyotas. They're everywhere, and that's the reticulating activation system, is that now it's now on your radar, and so you're seeing them everywhere. Mm-hmm. Well, now that I have these words in my spirit, on my mind, it has been amazing at how I am seeing these opportunities constantly of, being a champion or being working hard at something to overcome. And it has been just the crazy walk in seeing, the opportunities now I'm seeing all over to be those things for others. And, I used to beat myself up because I do have a tendency to kind of like come in, help someone with something they're struggling with, and then get out. It's like, okay, well, that's done, And I have friends who just, they just make friends and more friends and more friends. And I always felt so guilty because I just have, it's like, well, I did this and I feel like now I'm supposed to go. And I thought, well, maybe you're just shallow, But then the Lord showed me, it's like, no, this is what I created you for. Right. Yes, you're going to make friends with people, but you don't, I don't necessarily have you there to make friends as I do to have you there to help and then let them walk it out. Right. So that has been just such an interesting, sweet, and crazy walk that I have been enjoying. And, he just is walking me out of that orphan spirit. Mm-hmm. And now I haven't had like this, this overwhelming time of the Lord where I just felt his love, but I can feel his love in his direction. Mm-hmm. And I can feel his happiness, or his, I throw the word pride out there loosely, that I'm actually stepping into who he created me to be, and it's life-giving. Mm-hmm. So in that, the Lord took me out of church, like literally all last summer. Mm-hmm. And because I was doing so many things that he didn't ask me to do. Right. And so it's almost like it was a reset to get me out of there and to be able to put a stop to, to the things that I was saying yes to that I wasn't supposed to. Right. And now, and I feel like he's bringing me back in, but I have a clean slate. Right. And so I can pick and choose and pray about, what opportunities are out there and say no. Right. If it's not with who he created me to be.
Did you mention in your book also there was a season where I was also being overcommitted?
Yes.
And to me that rings a lot because that's something that I am very guilty of. Mm-hmm. And great causes, good things, but then sometimes I look home. Actually, my biggest ministry is at home, and I'm neglecting that one often because I'm out there doing all these other ministries. Right. And so. You talked about, and in the book I remember you talking about saying, I felt overcommitted to stop down, and now here last year you feel like God kind of says, hey, take a break here. I want you to kind of reevaluate what you're doing. So those 3 words that you heard, now you have more awareness, so you're looking for opportunities. You see them readily where God put you for those. I'm just curious, when you do that action then, to be a liberator, do you feel that comes natural? Do you feel like that's a challenge to be that was spoken over you? Does that make sense? I guess what I'm trying to ask. Or do you feel like actually that is very much how he wired me, and when I do that, it tends to come more naturally, or is there still a big element of stepping out in faith because it doesn't feel like someone else's shoes I'm wearing?
No, it's supernatural.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it is supernatural.
Right.
But it is very natural because it's what I've been doing.
Right. Yes.
You know, and when I look back, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what I've been doing all along. You know, but once again, not giving it weight because it's something that has, you know, it occurs over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. When we were in Impact, one year, Beth said, our leader Beth said, I want you to pray. We're going to pray and ask the Lord for the person on your right, and if they were a mode of transportation, what would they be? Mm-hmm. You know, and so we did that. And so the person on my left who's praying for me, she said, I feel like the Lord showed me that you are like a homing pigeon, and you come and you drop information, and then you fly back. Right. You know, and I was like, oh my gosh, that is so who I am. Right. You know, it's like, and then I fly back to the Lord. Right. For him to tell me, you know, where to go next.
Yeah, he puts in seasons for places for a specific purpose, and when that purpose is met, then it's
time to go.
The next task.
Right, because you can overwhelm the person that you're ministering to, you know, and you can overstay your welcome. Right. And so, you know, when I get that sense in me that it's time to go, then I go.
There's a sermon I heard. They were talking about comparing the eagle and the gopher. And asking the eagle to dig a hole, and the eagle will say how horrible they are and beat themselves over it. He asked the gopher to soar, and the gopher can't do it. But you ask the gopher to dig a hole, and you ask the eagle to soar. Now they feel this kind of, the way you're describing, natural, and when our Creator, the one who made us, who knows our heart, when He puts us, or when we stand where He puts us, when we do what we do, it's interesting that it tends to feel like, actually, does this feel natural? It doesn't feel so much. There's still that level of faith, sometimes stepping out and leaning forward, but you realize this is how He wired me to be. This is who I am. Right. You've mentioned during the different conversations that we've had about this, you've talked about prayer. And I'd like to hear more about your prayer life, because I'm a very visual person. So I saw this mom with young kids praying. Well, first I saw it praying after the horse incident. Then praying as they go to school. And you continue to mention about prayer and prayer and prayer. And so share with me about this, your prayer life, because it seems to be very powerful, strong, and I think I'm a big believer in prayer. But I'd love to hear about your prayer life.
Well, you know, I have to be careful that I don't make it a formula. Right. Because I will.
That's humans.
Right? I'll make a formula out of anything. Right. Yes.
Yeah.
And so I can remember reading forever. I have always studied the Bible in my bed. And I just, I've tried to like go to a chair or go somewhere in the morning, I get up and I have it all there, and then I spread it all around me. And so I was reading in Psalms one day, and it said in the morning, and then in another Psalm it was talking about in my bed, and through the watches of the night. And these are all things that describe, what me, yes. and so it gave me confidence that I didn't have to find like a special place or do anything crazy. That He was right there. So, but generally what I do is I get up and I invite the Lord into my day. At night before I go to bed, as I'm closing my eyes, I'm just thanking Him, and when I wake up in the night, I try to only praise Him because I feel like I'm always asking Him for stuff. So in the morning, I'll invite Him into my study and ask Him to reveal Himself to me, and kind of just a short prayer. And then I'll do my Bible study. And then afterwards, I will pray. And for me, I have to get on my knees to pray because I have ADD, and I have thoughts that are constantly like flying around. And I don't know, even in this interview, you could probably some of my speech could be like a little all over the place. Because it's hard for me to be focused. And so, but it seems like when I'm on my knees and I have my head down, I'm able to focus. And so I sing to him, I praise him, I ask a lot, and that's something I was just praying about today. Was like, Lord, I hate that I'm always asking, teach me to pray, teach me. You want a relationship, so teach me to listen.
Right.
And so now I'm like praying slower, and trying to take breaks. But then another thing is, I was reading a book by Andrew Murray, and it's about solitude and being before the Lord without saying anything. And so now and I believe the verse that he uses is, my soul waits only on you. And so what it is, so I just, so after I've kind of prayed and talked to him about, what I'm worried about or whatever, then I had decided to start tithing my day. So I give the Lord 24 minutes of silence.
Wow. That's a great concept.
And just invite him to speak to me. Sometimes he does. Sometimes I'll have, like, I'm writing another book and he'll, and even the thought of writing another book was, I wasn't thinking that. But then in one of these silent times, he started just feeding me ideas, what the cover would look like. And, and I was like, oh my gosh, is this another book? So sometimes, but it seems like when I'm there quiet, there's like a switch that flips inside of me. And it's almost like I think to myself, there you are. And I just sit there in silence. And it's the sweetest time.
It is interesting as you're talking about, it sounds very beautiful. But as you're talking through our conversation, you talked about the orphan spirit. But it sure seems like, despite having that orphan spirit, you're pretty good. And I don't mean any kind of accolades, but you're pretty good about running to the Father, though. And in prayer and request, when you were worried about your children, you ran to him and you told him. When you felt that you were angry, you were saying didn't know why, you ran to him. Was that always that way for you? Was that something that developed at some point? When you were a child, did you remember always feeling such a close direction with God? Because despite feeling that orphan spirit and saying I didn't grow up with a father, but you know where to run for help when you need help, which is amazing. Is a great strength. I think because the devil often for me will try to create distance, shame, and guilt. And therefore I can't run to my dad because I'm dirty. I need to go clean off first before I can come approach him. But that clarity of recognizing that, just like with any of your children, they just need to come whenever, no matter what they look like, what they're is just come and mom will take care of it. But you seem to have, through your life, it seems like you very much easily listen to run to the Father, at least.
That's interesting. When I was saved when I was probably, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7. And I was sitting in church and drawing, not paying any attention. But when the altar call came, I just knew in my spirit I had to go. I got to go, and I guess, it kind of started there, is just having the sense of, I got to go. I got to talk to him. And that's kind of followed me there was a time when I walked away from him for a couple of years, and he would. It's almost like he was tapping on my shoulder. You know, something would go wrong that I was doing wrong, and he would tap on, and I'd get caught, and he would tap on my shoulder, like, "Hey," you know, and I would just kind of shrug, you know, like, "Get off of me," you know, and then it was along the same lines, but then still doing the same thing. Something worse would happen, and I get caught, and the tap got stronger. And till it came to a point in time where he tapped on I got in trouble again. He tapped on my shoulder, but I knew that was it. That I either come back now or there was going to be trouble. Sure. You know, like irreplicable trouble. And so I was probably 24, 25, and I came back. And I think that probably at that point, prayer really kicked in for me. Right. And because I saw how he protected me, he protected me in so many ways. And so I think that it was probably there. I mean, I always kind of prayed, you know, just kind of nominal prayers, you know, as a child. But I never doubted that he was listening. Right. You know, I knew who I was praying to. Right. But it was at that point in my 20s that I knew, you know, we need communication or I'm in trouble.
Right. And it's a relationship, so like anything else, you expect with time that there'd be some kind of level of growth or improvement. So I'm sure that where your prayer life is now compared to 30 years ago, yeah, there's been some growth there going on. But I think it just starts with that seeking him, and because he's there and he's always been there, and looking for him, and it's just so powerful that it seems like you've gotten to the point where that becomes that natural response to saying, when I get scared, when I get threatened, when I get whatever happens, that's where I run to. At least I know where to go for help. And in medicine, you know, as I do primary care, I don't need to be the specialist. I just need to know when I need to call the specialist and get the help from the specialist to do it. And just the same thing with God. It's okay for me not to know or know what to do or get stuck, but knowing, you know, where to go from. And I identify a lot with, I grew up very much in religion, and the concept of being saved was novel. I remember thinking of people saying, that's a little bit arrogant. They're going around saying they're saved. Like, how do they know? Like I've seen some of the stuff they do. That doesn't sound like save people.
Hello.
Right. Very judgmental. And then even though we talked about grace, the background was very clear that there's a lot of work, so you better figure that out, because otherwise the grace is going to go away. Right. The cross won't be enough. But when that switched for me, which wasn't too long ago, and he's always been there, but when that veil was torn, I'll refer to that way, and I could approach him knowing that I am saved. His grace saves me, and that's it. That's it. I can't add anything more to it. That's the end of the conversation. He can work on me, and he'll improve me, and I'm a work in progress, and there's so much of me that needs to improve and grow. But salvation is not dependent upon those things. So salvation is dependent upon him. And so when you say that kind of hits really, really close to home. And then you talk about prayer and wanting to not have a formula, because that's, for the best intentions that I have, sometimes it's easy to say, well, I'll just create a formula, and this is what that is, or even in a daily devotional routine, and trying to not just have it go through the motions. On the other hand, being disciplined, sometimes it does involve just doing the motion, going through it, because you're not always having that on the mountain high experience, and sometimes it's just continue to be sitting there. Like I love the concept of the 24 minutes. You tithe your time to him, and you just listen. You talk, but at that point you're going to listen and just see what he says.
I'm done talking.
Wow. And so now you're going to be writing a second book.
Yes.
Or you are writing a second book.
Yes. I'm working on I'm working on editing it right now.
Wow. Okay. All right.
So.
And what's this one going to be about?
This one is, this one is similar, but it's lessons. It's lessons learned, and it's I've interviewed people to talk about how they've heard the Lord and how they walked it out. So it's I guess it's just God speaks in so many different ways. Once again, not a formula. And just what that looks like, because I think that people get stuck, and they're like, oh, I don't know, if God is talking to me, I don't know, and so it's examples, and so it's examples of the way other people have heard Him, but never in opposition to the Word,
right?
If you feel like the Lord is telling you to, do something terrible, not the Lord, right, exactly. And, seek counsel, which is something that happened when I wrote He Speaks. I had sent it to the publisher. It was being published, and I was taking a nap, and all of a sudden it was like coming out of, like you're drowning and you're fighting your way to the surface, and you take that gulp of breath, and I realized that I didn't put anything in my book about if you feel like you're hearing the Lord and it doesn't line up with His Word and who He is, that you need to go and a disclaimer, actually.
Right, exactly.
And so I was like, oh my gosh, I just felt panic. So I called the company. And they had to halt the press. I had to pay a fine, and I had to pay to, do all this stuff. God, it was an expensive mistake, but I was like, it has to be in there,
right? And
so, where was I going with this? So
validating, I think, the voice.
Yeah, and so, and just in knowing that He is not going to speak in a manner, He can't speak in a manner that is in opposition to His Word and His character. And so just knowing that, and but in knowing that, then there's this freedom to be like, is that you, Lord? Are you telling me to do that? And so it's people's examples of how, that happened to them, and this is how they walked it out.
Right.
And so that's kind of what the second book is about.
Right. In my short experience, it feels like it is a skill, not that we work on, but that God works on us. The more you hear, the more you listen. And you talked about also when you see things, you start seeing things more because you're open to that and you're aware of that. And then followed closely by the more obedient I am, the more He'll talk to me. If He still told me to do the same thing He told me to do 6 months ago and I'm still not doing it, I may not hear anything different. Because you go back and do that thing I told you last time, but as you step out and you do, whether it's write a book or sometimes it's just even encourage someone that seems like it'd be an odd like why would I approach someone out of the random and just encourage them or something? We have no idea what's going on. And then you hear their perspective of like they were in a place where God was using you, and I had no idea that I was being used for anything. It just seemed like, okay, all right, I should say that. Consistent again with the Word, and making sure that it's encouraging, building up whatever spirit, whatever is right. But it seems like the more you do that, then the easier it gets to be able to hear His voice and to take that next step. So when is your book going to be released, do you think?
I don't know. It's like as I'm editing. This is the first editing.
Okay.
So as I'm editing it, He's been giving me other things to put in it, and then once I get this done, then my daughter Amelia has been my editor.
Right. Yes,
so she's so good.
Yes. Right.
Yeah. So then we're going to spend some time together, and we go through it line by line. And it's funny. And she's like, "Well, I think you should say this," and I'm like, "That's not me." We're going to figure it out, but I'm not saying it like that, Right. And then I saw that TBN has a publishing company,
Okay.
And so I'm contemplating, and you don't have to have it completely done. So I thought if I got it through my editing and Amelia's editing, then I was going to send it to them to be reviewed.
Okay.
And
Wow.
see what happens.
I'm not sure if I cut or not. Did you say the name of this book, or do you have a name?
You know what?
Or maybe you don't want to share it. You don't feel like you have to.
No, I thought it was going to be listening.
Okay.
But then I thought, there's so much more in there. It's kind of like lessons. And so I've just been praying about it. And I just felt like the Lord said just that somewhere in the title needs to be He Speaks.
Sure.
And then, I'm not sure what the end will be, but.
And you've been interviewing individuals for this book.
Yes. Yeah.
That has to be quite a process.
It is, but it's fun.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it is. It's but He brings to me like people to talk to.
Okay.
Like I have a friend of mine who was a drug addict and was going home to commit suicide, and the Lord just poured liquid love on her in the car where she had to pull over, and that changed everything for her. So that is her testimony. And, we are always hearing not we are always, but we hear testimonies, these grand testimonies. And I feel like there's another aspect, another testimony that we don't hear about very often. And that is of the person who was saved when they were young and they live in a Christian home and nothing really has happened to them.
Right.
So they think.
Right.
But that's what it looks like when it works. And that is so important.
Right. Right.
And so I want that to be seen too, because it's just as important. We're all in the mud.
Right.
Some people are deeper and some people, whatever, but, all sin will kill you, and so, so I have in mind of someone that I want to give me their testimony the Lord put on my heart, just a person who has had a good life, and they don't have the baggage of having, done this or done that,
Right.
And so now I'm adding that,
Right.
So it's just like little things here and there.
That's good. Episode 5 that I recorded, I call it Consistency of Hope, because it's describing a testimony that what you're saying is an individual who says, I never strayed from God. God was always there and having that experience. And I think that is such a powerful testimony because consistency is huge. For most of us, we have to learn because we broke it or we messed up. And then, all right, I have to come back because I realized my way didn't work out. But to choose Him day in, day out, constantly, that is huge testimony.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
There's a gentleman named David Wood, and he has a testimony on YouTube. But he was friends with Nabil Qureshi, who wrote Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus.
Okay.
And so he was Muslim, and so he and David Wood meet in college and become great, great friends. And Nabil, they're both so smart. And but Nabil's parents were Muslim missionaries, and so he meets David, and they're kind of like sparring back and forth. And so David Wood, so in his book, Nabil talks about David Wood's testimony. So he's like, look it up on YouTube. So look it up. Well, David Wood was a sociopath. And he heard in his mind to kill his father. He thought that, he was being told to kill his father. So he tries to kill his father with a ball-peen hammer. In his dad's sleep, so he ends up going to prison, and just all these crazy things happen to him, and how he comes to faith in Christ. Well, I was watching him talk at a church, and he said, I hear these testimonies, I've heard testimonies from prisoners, I've heard testimony, these terrible, terrible testimonies, and he goes, boring. He's like, that does not interest me because I'm right there. I mean, that was my testimony. Right. He goes, what excites me is what it looks like when it works.
Right.
This is what it's supposed to be.
Right.
And I was like, you're right. We get so fixated, because there's such a dichotomy from where they were to where they are. Mm-hmm. But we have this tendency, if you are a person who feels like they don't have a testimony, to not speak up about the goodness of God in their lives. Yeah. So I just think it's so important to highlight that.
Yeah, this friend, family actually was describing it as boring. He says, boring. I mean, no, your testimony is powerful. It's extremely powerful. You're right. Of what it looks like, when you live under the shadow of the Almighty.
Right.
And you remain there.
Right. Because I think that there's not one person with the grand testimony who doesn't wish that they had that testimony.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we've all been given, I think, different perspective for different reasons. We get to share wherever we are.
Right.
I think that's the whole point, to just speak.
Right. He uses everything.
What he's done in our life, exactly, to speak from everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to be able to talk to you.
Thank you.
I appreciate your, I think you've given me so many different topics that we've covered and discussed it, but just your willingness to share about just how real your relationship with God is, and with listening and speaking and then just being quiet. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been an honor and a privilege to be here to speak to you.
For the audience, again, that's listening, I'd encourage you to, if you feel that this is something that's good for you, that's edifying, that's encouraging, please share it. This is just a grassroots, so this is how this is spread. But again, I thank you for listening, and God bless you.